Hey guys, welcome back. So, the other day I wrote an entry regarding beholders, and along the way I came to realize I'd be unable to cover each and every variant of beholder and beholder kin in that entry. So I think today we're going to do exactly that. Now, I may not go over 100% of the variants and kin, but I want to at least touch on the primary ones, looking at their biology, abilities, and other interesting facts regarding them. So without further ado, let's dive into some lore about beholder variants and beholder kin. A cluster of tiny lights descended from a dark crevice in the ceiling. These motes cast an eerie glow on the great alien skull that hung beneath them. From the Journal of Justice Hollowquill, Explorer of Undermountain. Up first, we have this lovely guy, the Death Tyrant. As mentioned in my prior entry, beholders have the ability to quite literally warp reality with their mind if they focus on something hard enough. In addition, beholders don't truly sleep when they rest. Instead, a beholder's mind remains semi-conscious even as it dreams. And on rare occasions, a beholder's sleeping mind will drift to places beyond its normal madness. In this instance, they may imagine a reality in which they exist even beyond death. If, or perhaps when, this ever comes to pass and such a dream takes hold, a beholder can begin to transform, its flesh falling away, leaving a death tyrant behind. This creature possesses all of the cunning and much of the magic it had in life, but instead is now powered by undeath. And where a sleeping beholder once lay, instead a massive naked skull with a pinpoint of red light gleaming in its hollow eye socket has taken its place. During the transition, during the act of decay, the beholder loses its eye stalks, but the death tyrant replaces them with 10 spectral eyes that hover above the creature and glare in all directions. So don't fool yourself into thinking these creatures are any less perceptive than their living precursors. Death tyrants are brutal foes and engines of destruction that truly embrace undeath. But I have to say, the worst aspect of these monsters by far is the nature of their central eye. In the previous entry, we learned beholders can project a literal anti-magic cone from its central eye, which is absolutely devastating to casters of magic. But you'll be interested to know, Death Tyrants have a similar ability. When a Death Tyrant glares in one's direction, instead of anti-magic, it projects a massive cone of negative energy. Some of you may not be perfectly familiar with the nature of negative energy, so I'll just say that any being caught within the Death Tyrant's cone can't be healed through any means whatsoever, which means none of your adventuring party's cleric's healing spells will have even the slightest effect. And perhaps even worse, any creature that perishes under the gaze of a Death Tyrant will nearly instantly reanimate as a zombie. So, driven by a hunger for power and security, Death Tyrants are known to advance against humanoid settlements using its eye rays to destroy every creature it encounters, effectively building itself an army of undead. If left unchecked, a Death Tyrant might wipe out the population of a city in weeks, then set its undead eye on wider conquest. As each settlement falls, the Death Tyrant's zombie forces could build to overwhelming numbers. That being said, it's not unheard of for incredibly powerful mages to keep Death Tyrants in bondage and use them as guards for their lairs. It makes sense seeing how formidable this variant is, and I can imagine the ability to control them through magic is pretty tempting for an enterprising mage. But I think that's enough about our friend here. Let's move on to the Bloodkiss Beholder. Now, we have a fair amount of information on our previous subject, but going forward, these variants and kin are ironically less fleshed out than the Death Tyrant, but let's try to learn as much as we can with what we have. A Bloodkiss Beholder is an undead vampiric beholder whose eye stalks have mutated into mouths with fangs that allow it to drain the blood of its victims. The flesh of a Bloodkiss Beholder's body has been twisted by necrotic energy until it barely resembles its old living form. These variants are still incredibly intelligent, similar to standard beholders, and they prefer to live alone but have been known to be forced into service by powerful necromancers. In combat, blood-kissed beholders can perform a banshee-like scream that emanates forth and disorients their prey. Their thirst for blood drives them into a violent frenzy which causes them to attack anything and everything nearby with equal ferocity. But the scent of bloodied prey drives them into an even deeper frenzy, in which they hook their teeth into their injured prey and drain them completely. But I will say, despite their blood frenzy, they're still quite rational beings, so will absolutely flee from an encounter if it becomes too dangerous. Either way, it's nothing I ever hope to meet when I'm out in the wilderness. I rather like my blood, so I'm not really in the mood to share. However, this is where our information regarding this variant ends, at least from my research. If there's any reputable lore on these beasts that I'm unaware of, I'd love to hear from any of you, as I'm always interested in new sources. But for now, let's move on and take a brief look at the next variant, the Elder Orb. Elder Orbs are, as one might expect, simply very old and powerful beholders. They're between 4 and 6 feet in diameter and over the years have had their eyes rot away, being unable to regenerate them. In exchange, though, they've gained powerful wizardly powers. But let's start with the basics. Elder Orbs tend to eat quite a bit less food than other beholders and thusly are able to tolerate a wider variety of foods, up to and including poison. Their bodies are also known to be incredibly resistant to magic, and they can see through nearly all forms of illusion. A standard beholder will typically die between the ages of 120 and 150 years of age, but the Elder Orb never has to worry about that because it's been all but verified that these nasty beasts are actually immortal. They're still born like any other beholder and, apart from inborn sorceress abilities, are indistinguishable from the others. But as the years fly by, the Elder Orb deviates from the standard life cycle and the differences become more prominent. It's not exactly known when, but from some point onwards, an Elder Orb stops growing physically weaker from age and simply just continues to live on forever, at least until it suffers death by combat, for example. As mentioned in my Beholder entry, standard beholders don't actually cast magic spells in the traditional way. But Elder Orbs certainly do, in just the same way a mage might cast them. In fact, Elder Orbs are quite powerful spellcasters, although they're restricted to verbal spells they've developed or even stole from others. In typical Beholder fashion, they guard their knowledge jealously and are known to substitute the somatic components of spells with what's left of their eye stalks. It's the material components for most spells that presents the greatest problem for our Elder Orbs. So they typically either learn to cast spells with cheap and abundant components, or just highly favor spells without any material components at all. Also, before we move on to our next variant, I want to mention that Elder Orbs are quite capable of controlling the aforementioned Death Tyrants with their magic, as well as creating them through rituals. These tyrants are usually sent out to do the Elder Orb's dirty work, like taking care of any meddlesome adventurers. So beware if you come across one of them, because there's a real chance that an Elder Orb could be in the area as well. But moving on, let's take a look at another powerful beholder type, the Hive Mother. Hive Mothers, or known simply as the Ultimate Tyrant, are an incredibly rare type of beholder that are capable of magically dominating other beholders. These beholders are significantly larger than your standard type. They can easily reach 12 feet in length and weigh up to 15,000 pounds, which is just mind-blowing to me. Imagine an 8-ton aberration floating through the air, surrounded by both Death Tyrants and Gazers, which are essentially just tiny, unintelligent beholderkin that sort of act like the Hive Mother's pet. Hive Mothers are genderless and asexual, just like other beholders, and are known to also be quite a bit more intelligent than even the already intelligent regular beholder. They're fanatical and have great natural resistance to magic. They've got enormous mouths for devouring their foes, which tends to be fairly easy for them given their size. Their central eye produces an absolutely massive cone of anti-magic which reaches out to 240 feet in length. Also of note, they've been known to exist with and without the eye stalks known to standard beholders. Clearly some incredibly powerful foes in their own right, I personally believe Hive Mothers are easily the variant of beholder you least want to stumble across in the wild, especially when you factor in their pets. But now, let's move on and start looking at a few of the more common beholderkin variants. First, what exactly is a beholderkin and how are they different from the variants we just talked about? Well, in short, beholderkins are not technically true beholders in the purest sense, but still share quite a few similarities with them. And while beholderkin are still quite evil and cruel in nature, most of them don't express the xenophobia attributed to beholders. So we'll cover 3 of the more common types, and up first we have the death kiss. Death kisses are lesser beholderkin with long tentacles that end in mouths in the place of their eye stalks. And it's known that death kisses come about as a physical manifestation of a beholder's vivid dreams, in particular, dreams about mass blood loss. As mentioned before, death kisses resemble beholders overall, but are missing their eye stalks and the mouth usually located below their central eye, and are instead covered in 10, 20-foot long tentacles. These guys aren't small either, their bodies are 10 feet across and their leathery skin is a mottled gray or a muted hue of the original beholder's skin. At the end of each of their tentacles is a toothy mouth, and each of these tentacles are fully retractable. In fact, these guys can even speak through these mouths, which comes out as a nasally, high-pitched voice that speaks in either deep speech or undercommon. Death kisses are actually surprisingly submissive compared to beholders, especially towards other powerful entities, because they lack the egotistical nature most other beholders have. The only thing they're really paranoid about is the loss of their own blood. These are sadistic creatures who enjoy playing with their prey and draining them slowly, who also don't tend to take combat particularly seriously. The reason they pursue blood in the way that they do is because by ingesting blood, the death kiss can generate electricity internally, which it can use to further damage its foes. But not only that, whenever a death kiss ingests blood, it actually heals its body from any injuries it's sustained. Also, as a side note, because of their internal electricity, whenever they bleed out in combat, their death can actually cause a complete electric discharge, greatly harming creatures in the immediate area. These guys tend to hunt alone and aren't exactly picky as far as what their prey might be. They'll prey on just about anything as long as it has blood. They're also not exactly sophisticated in their tactics. In fact, the greatest strategy you might find coming from a death kiss is them ambushing their prey from the ceiling and pulling them upwards. As far as reproduction, while it's true that death kisses appear when beholders dream, they're definitely capable of reproducing on their own. The process isn't exactly known, but their young incubate in the bodies of deceased death kisses, and within a day or so, 1 to 4 death kiss young erupt from the corpse. So now that we've covered all that, I hope you can see how dangerous these guys are. When I first started researching them, I almost found them to be kind of cute, but I'll just say I've changed my mind on that matter. Okay, let's move on to our next beholderkin, the Eye of the Deep. The Eye of the Deep is a water-dwelling relative of the beholder that's covered in reddish or greenish lobster-like chitin. They're approximately 9 feet wide and can easily weigh up to 6,000 pounds. They've got 2 antenna-like eye stalks on the top of their head and a large central eye located in the middle of their bodies. And on each side, they've got a pair of large arms that end in claws that resemble that of a crab. And between them, a massive mouth filled with razor-sharp shark-like teeth. Also, hidden underneath their bodies are approximately 90 sticky white feelers, which are used to paddle through the water or cling to rocks, although typically they're found just silently floating through the water. Eyes of the Deep are as deceptive as they are selfish, with no sense of loyalty. They'll only work with other creatures if promised food or convinced that the alliance is advantageous to them in some way. They also avoid others of their kind to prevent potential battles with equal foes. And while not particularly intelligent compared to normal beholders, they're still smart enough to employ traps and other tactical moves in battle. The Eye of the Deep is an extremely rare monster simply because it can only survive at a certain depth below the sea. If they ascend too high, their inner gases will actually expand inside of their bodies until they explode. That being said, they're known to be able to regenerate parts of their body given enough time, but for example, it's said an eye stalk requires about 6 to 11 days. However, some will require more or less time depending on the part. This subject is rather unique among the others in that by combining their eye rays, they can achieve a special effect. When both eye rays are working in concert, they can craft incredible illusions, creating moving three-dimensional images. As they grow more skilled, they can create and manipulate these images without actually even looking at them. Typically, they use this ability to lure in unsuspecting survivors of shipwrecks before hitting them with their second most iconic ability. Within a second, an Eye of the Deep can generate a bright white flash that stuns and blinds a target. And with their target sufficiently paralyzed, they can then move in and use their great claws and mouth to simply rip them apart. Anyways, in regards to reproduction, I think you'll be surprised to hear that these beholder can actually lay eggs. They periodically deposit these eggs on the ocean floor and essentially just wait for another of their kind to fertilize them within about 2 months or so. I'm not sure exactly how long they take to hatch, but once they're born, the young Eyes of the Deep subsist on carrion and small fish for the entirety of their youth, at least until their powers and strength develops. And that more or less covers this rare version of Beholderkin, so let's finish this entry out with one more for good measure. This is the Spectator. These guys are extraplanar Beholderkin native to the clockwork nirvana of Mechanus, which I think I'll have to cover in its very own entry. These creatures are typically 3 to 4 feet in length and weigh in at around 250 pounds, so significantly smaller than any of the other types we've talked about today. They have 4 eye stalks as opposed to the typical 10 of normal beholders, with 2 located on each side of their body. A spectator's skin tends to be thick, lumpy, and rubbery with numerous blood vessels visible on the surface. And of course, like all of our subjects today, they have a single main eye in the middle of their floating bodies. However, unlike any of our other subjects, spectators are vigilant and generally trustworthy, which is why they're commonly summoned to serve as watchful guardians, as they can be relied upon to protect items in all but the most dire situations. They possess 2 methods of behavior, a free-thinking mode and a contemplative mode. Free-thinking spectators are found wandering the plains at will, openly chatting with those they come across. And in their contemplative state, they rather resemble philosophers who might spend over a century pondering vast philosophical questions. However, approached in this state, they're still quite friendly and enjoy discourse, but will soon after request to be left alone to their ponderings. One can imagine that after years of isolation in this way, it could pretty easily result in some of the spectators gaining personality quirks, such as referring to themselves in the third person. In regards to them being guardians though, they do tend to dislike guarding things for lesser life forms, so there still exists a bit of the ego one might find in the standard beholder, but to a much lesser degree. That being said, after promising to guard something, their loyalty is pretty much absolute to the summoner, at least until their time is up. They pride themselves on their guardianship and will refuse commands to do anything else until asked to guard something else by their summoner. In fact, the greatest pleasure for a spectator seems to be driving away any forces of chaos which might intrude upon their guardianship. A spectator's strong sense of justice dictates that creatures who do not intrude upon their duties have a right to live, and they would never attack a helpless opponent unless attacked via sly or cruel means. So this further illustrates the vast difference in behavior when you compare this beholderkin to any of the other variants today. So strong is their sense of justice that killing creatures for any reason outside of duty or self-defense would lead most spectators to literally end their life. When it comes to combat, their main eye is known to be able to turn spells back at the caster so long as they were close enough to the spectator and attacking it head on. Their 4 eye stalks can cause effects like paralysis, fear, confusion, or even the ability to inflict wounds upon their foes. Beyond this, spectators can actually plane shift, but they'll typically only flee from battle in this manner if they're heavily injured and there's absolutely no chance of winning. So as mentioned before, spectators exist on the plane of Mechanus, which is a plane that embodies law and order more than any other that comes to mind. Spectators are organized into an upper and lower class. The lower class resides in small vertical caves in the Modron disk dug out using their mouths, whereas the upper class works as guards for important Modron and are educated to uphold the lawful ideals of Mechanus. The only way to become an upper-class spectator is to capture and deliver a rogue Modron to the local Mechanist authorities, but the position isn't permanent and will be revoked as the spectator reaches old age. Something interesting to note, however, is that as long as spectators are within the bounds of Mechanus, they possess the ability to rapidly regenerate their bodies, which seems to leave them if they're summoned to the material plane. And I think that pretty well covers the spectator. I wanted to end this entry with this one because I actually found them to be the most interesting of our subjects today, what with them having an actual sense of justice and a modicum of empathy. But anyways, I think this is a good place to stop this entry. There are many variants and beholderkin out there, many of which we simply just don't know much information about. Other kin like the Overseer, the Gouger, Director, Gazer, Goth, we simply don't know much about other than just cursory information. So if new information is discovered, I'd love to relay it to you adventurers. Who knows, maybe just being acquainted with these variants could go on to save your life one day while out there traveling. And that's exactly why I pen these entries. So for now, this is your guide signing out. Be safe, take care, and happy trails.